The frost came into Coldwell Magna on the last Sunday of Advent, the way a bailiff comes into a house, opening everything and pricing everything, and leaving every door standing wide behind it. It had been hard for 9 days. The beck below the mill had gone quiet under its lid of ice, and the road out to the turnpike was rutted into iron, and in the church of St. Chad, the water in the font had frozen an inch thick, and had to be broken each week with the end of a broom handle. The church had been a fine church once, in the way that everything in that parish had been fine once. It had a hammerbeam roof, and 11 pews of black oak, and a great south porch with a stone bench down each side, and it had, that December, no glass in 2 of the north lights, and no coal in the vestry bin, and the rector's living was worth £81 a year, of which 40 went in the small tithe to a man nobody in the village had ever laid eyes on. Bridget Ashe was in the porch at 7, before the light, as she was every morning of every week, breaking the font with the broom handle and sweeping the flags. She was 24. She was small, and she was brown-haired, and she wore a cloak the colour that wet slate goes, which had been her mother's, and had been turned and dyed once, and the dye had not held at the shoulders. Her hands were cracked at the knuckles from the cold water. Her eyes were grey and level, and gave back precisely what they were given. She was the sexton's niece, which in that parish meant she was the sexton, her uncle Amos having lost the use of his right side 2 winters back, and lost none of his pride at all. So she rang the bell, and dug the graves, and kept the register in a hand nobody had ever troubled to read, and Amos told the rector each quarter that he was managing nicely, and the rector, who was 70 and gentle and frightened of everything, chose to believe him. There was a thing in her pocket she never went out without. It was a brass tuning fork, worn bright at the tines, that had belonged to her father, who had been the parish clerk before her, and had taught her the psalms by making her sound the note before she sang a word of them. It was worth almost nothing. It had been the one thing she had refused to sell. That morning, having swept the porch and broken the font, she came out of the church door with the broom in her hand, and found the door blocked. There was a man standing square in the middle of it. He was tall, in a coat as black as a shut door, and a great deal better cut than anything that had come into that village in 10 years. And he had his back to her, and he was looking not into the church, and not out of it, but at the stone bench along the western side of the porch, and he had been standing there long enough that the frost of his breath had gone silver on the collar of his coat. There were 4 people waiting behind him, old Hepzibah Crowe with her sticks, who could not get past him and would not say so, the Tunstall boy with a basket, 2 women from the mill row with their heads down. They had been waiting, Bridget judged, some minutes, in that cold, because he was a gentleman, and because it was easier to freeze than to speak. Bridget Ashe had been awake since 5:30, and her hands hurt, and she had a grave to open, before noon, in ground that would want a pick. "You are standing in the door," she said. He did not turn. "I am aware of it." "Then you will be aware that there is a woman of 80 behind you with 2 sticks, and no feeling in her feet, and that this is the only door, and that whatever you are looking at has been in that porch since 1400 and something, and will be there when you have moved." He turned round then. He was perhaps 34, and had a face that had been good-looking before somebody went round it with a plane and took all the give out of it, and his eyes were the colour of the beck under the ice. "I did not see them," he said. "No," said Bridget. "That is generally how it happens. A man who is used to a room emptying in front of him does not think to look behind, and then people stand in the frost out of manners, and get a chill, and are dead by Lady Day, and nobody blames anybody at all. Stand aside, if you please." He stood aside. He did it at once, which she did not expect. Hepzibah Crowe went past him into the church, and the Tunstall boy, and the mill women, and the man in the black coat stayed where he was with his hat in his hand, and let all 4 of them go by him. And then he said, "You keep this church. I keep this porch. I have not yet begun on the church. There is no glass in 2 of the north lights." "There is not," Why? Because glazing is £4 and the church has 11 shillings, said Bridget. And because it is nobody's business but ours, and because you are a stranger, and I have asked you once already to stand out of the way, and I find I would rather do the asking than the explaining. Good morning. And she went past him with her broom and her frozen hands, and she did not look back, and she did not know, and would not know for 11 days, that she had just told the Duke of Ravensmere to get out of the doorway of a church that his own family had built, in a parish out of which his own steward had been drawing £40 a year in small tithe for 6 years, for the repair of a roof that had never once been repaired. What the Duke of Ravensmere had been looking at was a name. The stone bench along the western side of that porch had a slab set into the wall above it, and cut into the slab were the names of the men of that parish who had gone out in the year 12 and not come back, and the 11th name on it was Hollis, R., which had been his brother's sergeant, and the man who had carried him 2 miles off the field at Salamanca with a ball in his own shoulder, and had died of it in a cart 9 days later. He had been 4 years finding out where the man was from. He had come up alone, on horseback, in a coat with no crest on it, because he had learned in 11 years of being a duke that the moment a place knows what you are, it stops being itself, and he had wanted, for once, to stand in a real porch in a real village and read a real name, and not have 40 people arranged in a line telling him what he wished to hear. That was all he had come for. He had meant to stay 1 night at the inn and go home. He stayed 9, because of the door, and because of what he did the day after the door, which was to walk to the top of the church tower on his own and look at the roof. He had 11 years of being lied to behind him, and he could read a lead gutter the way other men read a face. What he saw was that the north slope had been stripped and patched with tarred canvas, and that the canvas was 3 years old at least, and that there had been no plumber's work done on that roof in a decade. And he had, in a strongbox at Ravensmere, 6 years of accounts in the hand of his steward, Mr. Peveril Sisson, each of them showing an annual disbursement out of the small tithe of Coldwell Magna for the maintenance of the fabric of St. Chad, and the figure for the 2nd year was £42 for the north slope of the roof, and he had stood under that canvas in the December wind and put his hand up and felt the daylight coming through it. He did not go to the rector. He did not send for Sisson. He took a room at the Bull under the name of Mr. Ravens, and he began, in a way that would have astonished anybody who knew him, to be useful. He mended the vestry bin lock himself, because he could. He carried coal. He held the ladder while Bridget Ashe rehung a shutter and handed her the wrong screwdriver twice, and was corrected both times without ceremony, and found himself absurdly glad of it. He came at 7 in the morning to the porch, because that was where she was, and she gave him the broom or the bucket, and told him where the draught was, and asked him nothing, which was the strangest and best thing that had happened to him in 11 years. Nobody in that parish had anything to gain from him, because nobody in that parish knew there was anything to be had. And what Bridget Ashe had never told anybody was that she had £190, and that it was not hers. It had been left in a tin box under the vestry floor by her father, the parish clerk, who had died of a pleurisy in the November of the 18th year, and it was the accumulated Coldwell poor stock, the church's own money, given by 12 dead people over 90 years for the relief of the parish, and never entered in any book but her father's, because her father had not trusted the last steward, and had said so in writing on the inside of the lid. She had found it at 19. She had told no one. Not her uncle, who would have told the rector, not the rector, who would have told the man who came for the tithe. She had spent 6 years administering it herself, in sums so small that nobody ever thought to ask. 11 shillings for a coffin, 4 for a pair of boots, a guinea to keep the Tunstall family off the parish in the wet summer, 31 separate payments in 6 years, and every one of them written in a ruled book in her own hand, with the date and the name and the amount and, where they could write, the mark of the person who had it. She was the poorest woman in that village, and she had been quietly running its charity out of her apron pocket for 6 years, and if she had been found out, she would have been called a thief in an afternoon, because there is no explanation on earth that a frightened parish will accept from a sexton's niece with £190 in a tin. So she kept her face. She had learned young that tears were a coin she could not spend and had never once been given change for. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. It was old Lady Amabel Wren who came at it sideways, the way old women do. She was 81 and lived at the dower house at the top of the village on 400 a year and a spine like a poker, and she had been 3 husbands' widow and had buried all of them without much fuss, and she had missed nothing in that parish for 50 years. She sent for Bridget on the second Sunday in Advent and looked her up and down for the length of half a minute and said, "You are not what I expected. I am sorry to disappoint you, my lady." I did not say I was disappointed. I said you are not what I expected, and there is a great difference, girl, and you had better learn to hear it. Sit, there, where I can see your face. She tapped the arm of her chair. Who buries the parish? My uncle Amos, my lady. Amos Ashe has not been able to lift a spade since the winter of 21. I am old, not blind. Who buries the parish? I do. Who rings the bell? Who keeps the register? I do. Who paid for Nan Tunstall's coffin in October? Said Lady Amabel, when her husband had 9pence, and the rector had nothing, and the parish overseer was at Marbury for a fortnight. And Bridget Ashe, who had answered every other question in her life without flinching, sat in that warm room and said nothing at all, for 1 second, 2, 3, and the old woman watched her not answer, and then said, more gently than was her habit, I have thought for 2 years that there was money in this parish that nobody can account for. I have not inquired, because I did not much want it stopped. But you will be found out, child, because you are being noticed now, and when a woman is noticed, the noticing does not stop at the part she chose. Whatever it is, get it into a book with names and dates on it, and get somebody respectable to witness the book. Do it before somebody makes you do it. It is in a book, said Bridget. Then you are cleverer than the rector, and braver than my 3rd husband, said Lady Amabel. And you had better tell that man who has been carrying your coal all week, because he is not a Mr. Ravens, and if you do not tell him before he finds out, you will not enjoy the way he finds out. Mr. Peveril Sisson came on the Thursday before Christmas to collect the small tithe, as he came every quarter, in a good gig, behind a good horse, a soft, pink, pleasant-faced man of 45, who smiled a great deal, and always had. He was in the vestry with the rector for 20 minutes, and he came out smiling, and found Bridget Ashe in the porch, with a pick in her hands, and frost to her elbows. Miss Ashe, he said. Mr. Sisson, you have been busy. His Grace's steward hears things, you know. He hears, for instance, that the coffin money in this parish comes from somewhere that is in no overseer's book, and has for 6 years. He came a step nearer, soft-footed for a heavy man. A word of counsel, from one servant to another. This is a small parish with a great deal of dark in it. A young woman with no friends and no family, for you have none but a cripple, does well to keep to the graves and ask no questions whose answers cannot help her. I should hate to have to lay the matter before the bench at the Epiphany sessions. I should hate it very much. The smile did not move. Unless, of course, there were nothing in it. In which case, you have only to be gone before the sessions, and there will be nothing said at all. Bridget looked at him, and saw it under the smile for half a second, and it was fear, and she understood then exactly what she was looking at. He had not come to frighten her about the poor stock. He had come because a woman who kept books had been standing too close to a roof he had been paid £42 to mend. So she did the thing she had learned from her father, which was to write it down. She had 9 days, and she used them, at night, with the vestry door bolted and 1 tallow candle, and she did it the only way she trusted, which was from the outside in. She had the ruled book already, 31 payments, 6 years, every name, every mark. She got the churchwarden's own tally of what the roof had cost the parish, which was nothing, because the parish had never been able to pay for it. She walked 11 miles to Marbury on the shortest day, and stood at the counter of the plumber and glazier there, and asked him, on the honest pretext of the North Lights, when he had last had work at St. Chad, and he looked it up, and said the 9th of April in the year 15, and the sum was £3.11, and he wrote it out for her and signed it. She got the marks of 4 men who had carried the tarred canvas up onto that roof themselves in the summer of 21, unpaid, because there was nobody to pay them, and on the 8th night she copied the whole of it fair, twice, and checked her columns, and said the totals out loud in the empty vestry, because a number said out loud cannot be argued away by a frightened man. She did not tell the Duke, because she still did not know he was one. She told him the other thing instead, on the 9th morning, in the porch, because Lady Amabel had been right, and because she found she could not go on handing a man a broom every day while keeping a tin box from him. She told him about her father, and the poor stock, and the 31 payments and the 6 years, plainly all of it, and finished by saying that if he thought it was thieving, he had better say so now. He was quiet a long moment. Then he said, "I have something to tell you that is worse," and told her his name. The Epiphany sessions sat in the great room of the Bull, with the fire lit and the whole parish standing at the back, because it was the only entertainment in January. Sisson laid it out beautifully. He was very sorry. He was extremely sorry. There was a young woman of that parish, the sexton's niece, who had been found to have upwards of £180 in her keeping. Church money, no book, no overseer, no authority. That he made no accusation, and would only observe that she was the poorest creature in the village, and had been buying coffins with it. And he looked round the room with his soft pink face, and said he supposed nobody could be blamed but the woman herself, since it was in the nature of such people to get in where they could. Bridget Ashe stood up. She was in the slate-coloured cloak, and her hands were still black at the nails from the grave she had opened on Tuesday. "Every word Mr. Sisson has said is true," she said, and her voice carried the length of that room, without her lifting it at all. "There is £189 and 4 shillings under the vestry floor. It is the Coldwell poor stock, given by 12 dead people over 90 years, and my father hid it there in the year 18, because he did not trust the man who came for the tithe, and he wrote his reason on the inside of the lid, and the lid is in that bag with his hand on it. I have spent 311 shillings of it in 6 years on 31 occasions, and here is the book, with the day and the name and the sum and the mark of the person who had it, and 22 of those people are standing in this room and can be asked. I told nobody. That was cowardice, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. And since I am to be looked at today, you may as well have the rest of it. The north slope of that church has been under tarred canvas since the summer of 21. 4 men who carried the canvas up are here, and have made their marks. The plumber at Marbury has not had a shilling's work on that roof since the 9th of April 15, and has written it out and signed it. And Mr. Sisson has drawn £40 a year out of this parish for the fabric of St. Chad for 6 years, and rendered an account for £42 in the 2nd year for the mending of that very slope, and I have the copy of it, because His Grace the Duke of Ravensmere fetched it out of his own strong-box, and gave it to me on Monday. Sisson laughed. It was a small laugh, and it was pleasant, and it was the worst thing he could have done, and he knew it, before it was out of him, because no man laughs at a column of figures. And in the silence after it, the tall man in the black coat came up out of his chair at the back of the room, where he had been sitting among the mill row with his hat on his knee, and walked the length of the floor, and stood beside her. "I am Ravensmere," he said, to the bench, in the flattest voice in England. "The lady has my accounts, because I gave them to her. Send for the roof. It went to the assizes in March, and took 4 days, and Peveril Sisson made restitution of what could be got out of him, which was less than half, and the Duke made up the rest out of his own pocket, and counted it cheaply bought. There was a night in February when he stood in the vestry with a pen and every intention of writing to 11 men who would have finished Sisson entirely, And Bridget Ashe put her hand flat on the paper. "Send him to the law, and not one letter," she said. "He robbed a church, and he can answer for it, where there are figures and a bench, and a man may reply. But I stood in this parish for 6 years, with money that was not mine, and told nobody, out of fear, and I know what fear does to the inside of a person's head. Mine happened to come out honest. That is luck as much as virtue, and I am not certain enough of the difference to stand over any man and enjoy it." So the roof was stripped and relieved by the Marbury man, who was paid the £42 it truly cost, and not a shilling more. The north lights were glazed for £4. The poor stock was entered in the churchwarden's book, in Bridget's own hand, and witnessed by Lady Amabel Wren, and administered thereafter, exactly as it had been administered for 6 years, by the same woman, in daylight. He waited until Whitsun, until the money was settled and the parish had its own again, and there was nothing whatever left between them that could be mistaken for a debt. And then he came to the porch at 7 in the morning, with his sleeves already back. "You have a living here for life, whatever you say to me," he said, "and my grandmother's cousin has undertaken to outlive me if I make you uncomfortable in it. So I am asking a free woman. I have been 11 years in rooms that emptied in front of me, and I never once looked behind me until a woman with a broom told me to. Will you marry me, Miss Ashe? On one condition," she said. "Name it." Hepzibah Crowe has that stone bench in the porch for the rest of her life, and nobody stands in front of it. A year on a warm evening at the end of the first summer, the Duchess of Ravensmere broke the font with the end of a broom handle out of habit, there being no ice in it, and swept the porch, and sat down on the western bench beside a woman of 82 who had feeling in her feet again. The roof over them was sound. She had thought all her life that being noticed was the danger, and had spent 6 years arranging not to be. She had been wrong about it, and it had cost her 9 days of terror and £189 of secrecy to find out. A man may stand in a doorway for 11 years and never once see the people freezing behind him, and it is not always malice. It is only that nobody has ever been rude enough to tell him. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.